Welcome to the Food Startups Podcast.
Hey y'all, this is Danny. I'm here with Matt. How we doing on the Food Startups Podcast?
Oh, we're doing good, man. We just had our 21st episode interviewing Bob Quinn about kamut, which is an ancient wheat. And it was an amazing interview, man. We definitely missed out, man. But I know you were doing big things in New York.
Yeah, man, New York sometimes calls. You got to give it its time because it's a big city and a lot of people. So I was busy hustling around and doing my thing. I'm really actually upset that I didn't make the interview. And it was also your first solo interview. How was that?
I didn't have you there as co-pilot, but, it was a little bit tough at points. But luckily, Bob Quinn, as you guys will see if you had a chance to listen to it, and if you haven't, I highly recommend you listen to it. Bob Quinn is just amazing. It's just a great way to show a life's work, kind of like in our interview with Jeff Moore. This is a life's work, and now you're talking about a guy that ships, 40 million pounds of a grain every year.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's incredible. And so I bet you it was good to focus in and get to really dig deep into what he was doing. So I'm glad that we had that opportunity.
Yeah, Danny, and he also invited us to come visit him in Montana. So maybe this summer or later this year we can make the trip up there because my aunt and uncle live in Montana, so we could definitely stay with them and then make the road trip out to where he is.
Absolutely. We could plan a ski trip around that too if it's in the wintertime, and that'll be first Food Startups Podcast ski trip.
That's right. So a lot of firsts hopefully will happen this year. Danny, I know you were talking to me before the show about business plans. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, I've been preparing a business plan for one of my companies, and I've never done it before. I've always thought that business plans were something for stiff executives that didn't do anything and didn't actually execute. And so I thought, well, instead of actually crafting a 60-page plan, why don't I just get to work? But I think that it's time now, based on where my company is at and based on how I have to forecast and how I have to plan for hiring, to actually look at and create a plan based on revenue, based on actually trying to give myself the best numbers that I can for projected sales and understand what it's going to take to actually get a company in the black. So I think that for many folks, unless you're selling your goods solely through distributors or Amazon.com and there's no groundwork, unless you're doing that, you're going to need to kind of plan things out really well because you're going to be losing money, I think, just acquiring customers and creating and growing your brand. I think a business plan is a great way to go to actually kind of anticipate some of the problems you're going to have to leap across and champion.
Now, I agree with the clear vision, and I'd like to argue my own 2 cents that a business plan can be useful. I don't know if it's necessary, and I guess there's lots of names for this. Some people may call it business plans, some may call it like strategic operating procedures or whatever it is. But I do like that, and sometimes it is a bit scary, at least for me, to sit down and write 20 pages about my business because maybe there's a lot of work that I haven't done yet, and there probably is. I think that's an interesting idea. But I do want to raise the point, and this is kind of based on my anti-fragile Nassim Taleb type ideas, that I like having a plan, but I also don't want to discount the limitation of information you have when you're starting up. Just knowing that you could plan something today, and you're going to learn so much more, Danny, in the next 6 months. So maybe 6 months from now, your plan will be different. And so maybe the answer is just to every specific time period to revise the plan. But I think it's important to keep in mind that we have limited information.
Absolutely, Matt. Dude, I'm 100% with you. I just think that business plan can really help you understand how much money am I going to spend in the next year or 2 years. I mean, when folks go on Shark Tank, which we were talking about 2 weeks ago, sometimes they don't know how much money they need, and sometimes they don't have clearly defined where they're going to put it. How am I going to trust somebody with my money as an investor if they don't know where they're going to put their money? They might put it in some commingled fund and then just take it out slowly. They won't be any worse for it, but I'll be out of an investment. So for me, I think that if I'm raising money, which is something I've thought about for in the next year, in the next 2 years, I want to be pretty clear on what I need to do and how much I can do and what I can pull off. Okay. I've had the opportunity to see and to work with some pretty big businesses. And so I did this exercise with myself this week. I said, Danny, all right, if you're going to have a $1 million revenue company next year, how are you going to get there? What are you going to do? What kind of equipment do you need? What kind of people are you going to have on your payroll? That's how I started the business plan. So I totally feel you. I just think it's useful to kind of be thinking ahead when you're talking so much about physical goods and manufacturing and that sort of thing.
I was actually meeting with a mutual friend of ours, Matt Newton. He was doing a web startup, and we've talked about this before, that financial planning for a physical products business where you're dealing with a lot of timelines is a lot more difficult than if you're starting like a web app where almost all payments are instant and it's a little bit easier to bootstrap. And so I think you're right. I would simplify it though, Danny. I think for me, I just look at like cash flow and burn rate. Those are the two biggest things. But you're right, because we're about to find out today as we're going to talk about ways to raise money for businesses that are starting out and getting into that $1 million revenue range.
Absolutely. So I think that it's going to be an ongoing discussion between you and I on how to really position your planning, and know where to put your resources, and also be flexible. Because I feel you. I love that. I love the anti-fragile mentality. I think that you got to be able to be thinking outside of the box despite the plans that you have, and you got to be readjusting. So fantastic, Matt.
All right. Well, Danny, I think we have a pretty interesting interview today for our guest, as we've alluded to earlier. Yes.
So we've got an awesome guest today. We've got an awesome company that is called CircleUp. And CircleUp has really helped a lot of small food and beverage and consumer-facing companies raise funding and become more sophisticated in their business operations. And so, Matt, who are we talking to today?
Today we have Katie Fitzgerald of CircleUp, which is a crowdfunding platform. Katie works with early-stage consumer companies in their fundraising processes, as well as structures partnerships to provide companies with access to valuable resources beyond capital.
Excellent. Katie, thank you so much for coming on our show. Really delighted to have you. Really excited to learn about CircleUp as well. So if we can jump right in, I'd love to hear, how'd you get involved with CircleUp? What's your background?
Sure. So prior to joining CircleUp, I was a private equity investor. I had spent several years at HIG Capital, a global private equity firm with about $15 billion in assets under management. While at HIG, I both evaluated businesses as well as made investments in the lower middle market. I also worked very closely with HIG portfolio company executives on strategic initiatives. So, and before that, I came from investment banking, came across CircleUp, and I've been here for about 15 months now. I was just really drawn to the overall vision of connecting consumer product companies with investors and making both the fundraising experience for entrepreneurs, but as well as the investing experience for investors more efficient.
Cool. Yeah, I've seen and checked you guys out a little bit, and I think that what you're doing as far as providing investment capital to smaller companies in this wonderful way is incredible. And so do you think that a lot of the culture within CircleUp is a mix of kind of being financially savvy, but also having excitement for smaller companies like food companies?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have, a lot of us have private equity background, or anyone that's touching that side of the business. And we're a registered broker dealer, so we take that very seriously. And so the skills that we have allow us to, assess these companies and make sure that we're providing our investors with strong opportunities within the space, and doing that in a way that is in line with the regulatory environment, et cetera. But at the same time, we are a young company ourselves. So we were founded in 2011, but launched in April 2012. And so we know what a lot of the kind of struggles and challenges of early stage businesses, and we've also worked with a lot of companies in our prior lives. So we're very much in line with the entrepreneurial environment that a lot of these companies are in, and we obviously work with them in that way. Also, our experience is leveraged for these companies. So while they might be young and don't know all the ins and outs of fundraising, because we have all that prior relevant experience, we're able to leverage that to guide them through these processes.
That sounds awesome. So just hearing you talk, it sounds like you're a wealth of knowledge for these companies. Very cool.
And Katie, you have two different sides, right? So there's the companies that are looking for investment, but you also go through an application process to find accredited investors. Can you explain a little bit about the accredited investors, how they find you, and what you look for in them?
Sure. So investors come from a lot of different sources for us. One big one is word of mouth. As we have investors on the platform investing in these companies, one of the benefits of consumer is that they then become brand ambassadors and tell others about the companies that they've invested in. That also leads to additional investors onto the platform. We also, from being very active in the consumer space as prior consumer investors, we have a lot of folks in our network through that, many of which are also investors on the platform. We get investors from some of the really great press that we get as well. So we've got a lot of press in across a lot of the major publications like Wall Street Journal, New York Times, CNBC, Bloomberg, etc. And when we get that press, we also like to pool in our companies so that they can leverage that press as well. And that also helps to attract additional investors to the platform. In terms of the types of investors that we look for, obviously accredited investors only, so high net worth individuals. But we also look to attract consumer-focused investors, so people that can do more than just invest in the company, but can offer additional value, whether it's through making connections or becoming brand ambassadors within this space, writing a larger check and joining the board to provide advice, helping to think through, international expansion or new product development, new channels, etc. We look for those types of consumer investors that can help the companies with more than just capital.
Excellent. And I heard you say that you mentioned this kind of phrase from going to consumer to brand advocates. So do you guys enter in the process when smaller brands are starting to kind of get a little bit rolling and get these brand advocates? Have they been in business for 5 to 10 years? What are your criteria for success for kind of bringing on these companies and putting them on your site and really promoting them?
Sure. So our typical company has anywhere from 1 to 15 million in revenue. We do work with some earlier stage companies, so companies with less than $1 million in revenue. In those cases, we look very hard at the team and their prior track record. But we're typically getting involved once the companies have some distribution and some sell-through, have reached that kind of $1 million revenue threshold in the last year. Typically they're, still only a few years old, so they're growing very quickly. We do work with some smaller companies, but we're typically getting involved when they've reached that $1 million threshold. And in terms of my comment around brand ambassadors, so one of the things that we love about consumer is just the tangibility of the product. One, when someone is going through that diligence process, they can better assess and diligence the actual underlying business model, which is around a physical product. And also, once they're invested, it's the reason why I say they become brand ambassadors is because it's usually a product that they, really liked and came to know during the diligence process, and they now have an economic incentive to help that brand grow because they're equity holders.
Definitely. So they're helping to spread the movement.
Exactly.
Now, Katie, So Katie, looking at, something like a show that's really popular like Shark Tank, right? And I'm thinking, let's just a hypothetical example, there's a new food product, maybe like a quinoa milkshake or whatever it is, right? And I'm an accredited investor and I want to put in, let's say, $500,000. Is it that simple where, I would look to a company and say, I'll give you, like in Shark Tank, I'll give you, $500,000 for a 20% stake in your company? What do these deals typically look like?
Sure. So at CircleUp, we don't provide valuation advice. We do look for companies that have valuations in line with market. So the company will decide what they're looking for in terms of valuation, and we will tell them whether or not we think that that's something that is feasible in the marketplace. What we want to avoid is having a company go out to our investors and spend, the better part of a year and a half trying to fundraise, and it's ultimately the case that the valuation is just too high, and investors aren't interested in it. And so we'll try to understand up front what those expectations are and make sure that we think that they're in line with market and with what our investors would expect there. The valuation question, it really depends on the company. It's very specific to the metrics of where the company's at, how quickly they're growing, what their margin structure looks like, what sector they're operating within. So it's hard to speak to it on an overall basis. Typically, companies are giving up anywhere from 18 to 35% of the business.
Definitely, definitely. I want to follow up with one question just because I am really curious. So it sounds like what you guys are doing in this really cool way is kind of refining and curating a funnel of companies in the consumer facing space. And what does business look like for you guys? Like how many deals from consumer companies are you looking at? Are you looking at 1,000 companies and looking to put 100 on and thinking that you're going to have 10 raise capital?
Sure, happy to speak to that. So we've seen since April of 2012 when we launched, we've seen over 3,000 companies. We only have about 2 to 3% of those actually go onto the platform. So we have a heavy curation process on our side. It's not because of the platform being able to handle companies. We still have a ton of capacity on the platform. We just think that curation is important for both sides. So we want our companies to go onto the platform having a reasonable chance for success, although there's never any guarantees. And we want to provide our investors with high quality opportunities.
Very cool. Now, you guys have worked with a number of companies now and raised funding for a lot of them. Now, can you walk us through, giving as many details as you feel comfortable with, a success story with a company that has used CircleUp?
Sure. So one company that we worked with, Rhythm Superfoods, it's one of the leaders in kale chips. They came to us and they were looking to raise about $750,000 in growth capital to build out the product line as well as purchase some equipment and just for general working capital purposes. And so we worked with them to close their round, and they ended up oversubscribing the round and raising a little bit over $750,000 in about 15 days. So that was a case where we were able to help them close the round very quickly. They raised on a convertible note, which is another structure that many entrepreneurs, especially at the earlier stage, explore. That was a really great case for us. The company has a really strong leadership team. They're growing really quickly. They're one of the leaders in a space that's a category that's getting a lot of focus and excitement right now. So we were able to bring in some relevant investors for them. We also got them some really great PR and, even helped them in their next round in terms of introducing them to investors. Another company that we worked with called Smarty Pants is an all-in-one gummy vitamin company. They have a product line for both children and adults, growing extremely quickly, a really great team with prior experience, especially relative to the channel focus that they have. We helped them last year to raise a $2.5 million round. They brought in some of their own investors, but we helped them to close that round and to bring in some relevant folks. They ended up also oversubscribing their round and bringing in some great investors while doing so.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys are really, really busy, and there's a tremendous amount of companies, and then to be able to really work with them, to take several thousand companies and then be able to help raise them these specific amounts of money is incredible. I mean, how big are you guys, if you don't mind my asking?
Sure, we're. I want to say about 25 folks now. We're quickly growing. We just raised a second round of capital ourselves. We raised our Series B and brought in some additional capital as well as an additional partner, Canaan Partners, and then had our prior investors participate. So Union Square Ventures, Google Ventures, Rose Park. So we were able to bring in some additional capital to continue to grow the team, to make this process more efficient for both entrepreneurs and investors. And a lot of that comes from the technology of our platform. So offering more tools to make the process more efficient and to get companies funded faster and in a more efficient way.
Okay, and do you guys make money by investing in companies themselves, or are you simply a market maker?
Sure. So we are a registered broker-dealer, and so we are able to take compensation on the amount that is raised through the platform. And so when we're able to work on a success basis, so whatever funds we bring in, we take a fee on those funds so that our interests are aligned with the company and with investors. So, we want to present our investors with high-quality deal flow, tools that they can use to do their diligence and decide to invest. And then on the company side, we don't charge unless we actually get them funding.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right. So, Katie, I think we've done a pretty good overview so far of CircleUp. And just like any startup, including all the food startups that you work with, I'm sure there's been plenty of bumps along the road. Can you tell us where you have failed, where you guys have learned from something that didn't quite work out?
So one thing I'll touch on here is just that Not every company that goes onto the platform will get funded. We don't expect for that to be the case, and we didn't expect for that to be the case coming into it. That's just not the way that the market works. We do have a very high success rate for funding companies. We've helped over 30 companies raise over 30 million in aggregate. So we've had a good deal of success there and in helping these companies to fundraise, but we also can't wave a wand and have the companies get funded. And it does take work from the entrepreneurs, and they need to participate as well and be engaged. So that's one thing I'll say in terms of, we'll never be perfect. And on the other side of things, more specific to CircleUp, is we are very focused on continuing to make the process more efficient for both sides.
Great. And so is that kind of this diligence process, I know, is really, really intensive. I can just tell. Is that kind of why you guys invest in these companies that are a little bit more established, just kind of learnings that you've had that, $1 million, that's about a safe amount to presume that they kind of have their stuff together to be able to, be here the next few years and still be, still be in existence, still be a profitable company?
So just one clarification there. So we're actually connecting these companies with investors. So we're not making the investments ourselves.
Right.
Just wanted to clarify that. But the reason why we focus typically on companies that have north of $1 million in trailing revenue is because then we think that helps in the diligence process. A part of that is that they then have more metrics we can draw from and more information that can be assessed by both us and our investors. Another part of that is that usually when a company has $1 million in revenue, they have pretty good distribution, often nationally. And so that helps our investors in the diligence process. And they can go to their local store. If it's Rhythm Superfoods, they can, go to Whole Foods and pick up, the kale chips and try them and make sure that they're doing that product diligence and that they understand the business model and that they connect with the brand in that way. So that's another benefit of working with companies that have that $1 million threshold. And then because they've gotten that $1 million, they've achieved, while they're still very young and it's still very, very risky. These are very risky investments. They're very early stage. They've shown that first point of execution, whereas companies that are just starting out and are pre-revenue may not have made that first kind of big sale or entrance into retail. An added level of risk there, and that's why the team becomes even more important, and their prior experience and ability to execute and their understanding of the market that they're operating in.
And Kay, I know you guys are looking for more than 1 million up, but there are some companies that are less than 1 million. And even if they're not approved by CircleUp, you talk about like national distribution, other things like that investors look for. If you're going to give advice to a company that's well below $1 million in revenue, what are the 2 or 3 key things you would tell them in terms of getting their company to a level that makes them attractive? I mean, not just to get to $1 million, but the things they can do to be on that path.
Sure. And just to be clear, we have worked with companies that are below $1 million in revenue, and quite a few of them. So don't want to say that we don't do that. It's just that we then focus more on the team and their prior experience. That's one note I'll say, is just making sure that you have a strong understanding of the market and that you have a team that can execute. And that helps when positioning to investors if you have that relevant experience behind you. Advisory boards can be helpful there, and having relevant investors in the round as well just helps tell that story to investors. So something to think about when companies are going out to investors at that very early stage. In terms of broader advice, if you're below $1 million and you're looking to fundraise, sometimes setting valuation can be tricky. So I would say explore alternative structures. Figure out how much money you need to bring in and how you can preserve some of that ownership. Or often companies that are growing very quickly and are below that $1 million threshold, many will pursue a convertible note structure, although all structures have their pros and cons. So companies should seek legal advice there and understand the structures. But that's another point that I'll mention, is just kind of how you structure the deal. And then in terms of just growing the business, things that are important to investors include seeing high growth and traction in the market. So That's one thing to consider, but also being smart about the way you're growing. So that one, from a capital standpoint, making sure that you can fund operations, but also in terms of making sure that you're going into the right account, and you're getting that not only those accounts placed, but also you're getting that sell through. Building the brand is incredibly important, and having a differentiated product and being able to communicate that to your customers is really important. Investors also look for strong gross margins, and we look for that as well. That allows you to reinvest in the brand. And so it's not all about making that sale. It's about doing so in a capital efficient way.
Excellent. What niches have really worked for you guys in particular?
So we don't focus exclusively on food. We work across consumers, so anything from food and beverage to pets. We do retail, apparel, alcohol and spirits. So we work across the consumer space. In terms of food and beverage and interesting trends that we're seeing there, obviously there's a big focus on health. So that spans everything from organic and all natural, gluten-free, and some of the other allergen-free stuff, fresh, whether it's fresh pressed juices or raw foods. Those are a lot of interesting categories right now. It's all about offering something that's different. So small companies are competing with much larger incumbents, and that have a lot more spend and more broadly recognized brands. And so in order to stand out, you have to be able to communicate to the consumer something different, whether that's your story, whether it's a one-for-one model like a soapbox or a Tom's Shoes, or if you're a B Corp and you're focused on more than just the single bottom line, and you're a triple bottom line company focused on giving back and being responsible. That's another way you can tell your story to consumers to differentiate. Or whether you're just bringing something new. As an example, there's a company, Cook Simple, is focused on convenience and health through their prepackaged meals. You've got I'm sure you know of the kind of coconut water craze. Well, bringing something new to that as well, like Watermelon Water Company that recently launched at Expo West. So those are all examples of companies that are doing something different. Although they are playing in a crowded space, they're bringing something new or communicating a different story to the end consumer.
Great. And so do you guys ever reach out to companies and ask them to kind of consider joining and consider raising an investment through your platform?
We do. So we're very active in the space. We not only get a lot of referrals from people, but we also do a lot of outreach ourselves. So I was at Expo West, a few months back. We go to all the major trade shows to both see what the trends are, make sure that we're aware of those, and also to identify new companies that would be a good fit for our platform.
Fantastic. And you mentioned that it is a crowded space, so as the artisanal food space becomes more and more crowded, what is the best way for companies to compete?
Yeah, so as I was mentioning, it's really just about bringing something new and innovative. Whether you are attacking a really sleepy aisle within the store and bringing something new there, whether it's a fresh, healthy approach, or whether it's gluten-free, or whether it's just exciting packaging, you have to be able to bring something different, especially when you're competing with larger players.
Great. And if I can just have your opinion just for our listeners, I'm wondering, what do you think is the most kind of exciting food trend, or what offers this different label, this new label to you that still has room to mature these days?
Sure. So I think the consumer is really health conscious now, and that's continuing to grow. But I also think that still have a really busy consumer. And so whenever you can bring health in a convenient way, I find that incredibly interesting. And a company that I mentioned earlier called Cook Simple, they're bringing prepackaged convenient meals to their consumers, but in a healthier way. So all natural. They're encouraging consumers to add fresh proteins and vegetables to the meal. All of the ingredients are ingredients that you would know. There's no chemicals or anything that you wouldn't understand on the label. And they're bringing that into a sleepy category, but one that resonates with the consumer because people are busy, but people also want to be healthy. So I find that a really interesting trend right now.
Is that like plated or like Nuvo, or just is it like delivery where you where people receive shipments and they prepare at home, or do they?
No,
pick it
this
up
is
at a
actually
supermarket?
sold on the shelf.
I gotcha. Okay, that's cool. That's great. And I think that space definitely seems like it's really growing and it's getting reinvented so that you don't have to buy really mediocre chicken Caesar salads at your supermarket anymore.
Yep.
Cool. Great. Well, thank you.
Great. Well, Katie, no, this is, and by the way, really good answer. Thanks so much for joining us today. We learned a lot, and listeners, for the website, we're going to link up to a lot of the companies mentioned, to CircleUp, to some of the legal terms mentioned, like convertible note, just so you can read more about that.
Yeah, thank you both for having me and taking the time. Really appreciate it, and love what you guys are doing. So thanks for letting us be a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of our listeners will really be checking out CircleUp.com, and will also be looking forward to be applicants in the future.
Thanks so much for listening, and as always, if you have any questions or comments, find us online at foodstartupspodcast.com.